Not every sentient anomaly the SCP Foundation contains is a monstrosity hell-bent on destroying the world, or a dangerous apex predator with a taste for D-class. In fact, most aren't. Most sentient anomalies are perfectly docile, even polite. They range from helpful talking animals to self-aware AI to former Foundation personnel themselves. There's little need for these low-security anomalies to be treated with the same paranoid caution reserved for anomalies like SCP-939 and SCP-049. And for some of them, the Foundation can even help them out a little bit. One of these anomalies is SCP-4149. At cursory glance, SCP-4149 seems to be some sort of standard anomalous location, not at all uncommon for the Foundation to deal with. Just stick a lock on it and call it a day, right? But the containment procedures tell a different story. MTF personnel are ordered to act like they are visitors of an art gallery when inside SCP-4149. Not just that, but any character breaks have to be played off like live theater. What kind of strange anomaly requires hardened agents and researchers to act like performance artists? Let's go back to when the Foundation first discovered SCP-4149. It was 2007 in Chicago, and Foundation agents across the city were stalking out art galleries, painting exhibitions, museums, and other fine art repositories. It wasn't some wild goose chase to finding a painting-based anomaly like SCP-1155 or SCP-3864, but instead a concerted operation to root out anomalies and people associated with the notorious group of interest, Are We Cool Yet? Don't let Are We Cool Yet's name fool you. The Foundation has a long and storied history with this group of subversive, nonconformist artists that sprang up after World War II. They've changed over the years in political attitudes and direction, but one thing remains consistent: they make anomalous art. And not just anomalous art, dangerously anomalous art. Paintings that drive people to madness, sculptures that kill viewers, sound familiar? And installations that result in dozens of casualties. These anomalous art terrorists are extremely dangerous, and no one knows them better than the Foundation. Chicago, being known for its art, is one of their favorite haunts. So when the Foundation launched a stakeout operation tracking known Are We Cool Yet members, they knew they'd find something eventually. That happened in June, when two Foundation agents tailing a group of Are We Cool Yet members saw them moving a number of paintings out of a truck and into what seemed to be a regular condominium. The agents, excited to finally get a lead, jumped out of the car and quietly followed after them, right into the door of the building. They rushed in with their guns to find nothing. But on the second floor, things were more interesting. One of the Are We Cool Yet members was laying on the ground, writhing in pain and covering his face. Upon being poked by one of the agents, he lowered his hands, revealing a gory sight. The man's face was warped like a Picasso painting. His nose was on his forehead, his mouth was slanted all the way to the left of his face, and his eyes were on his tongue. He cries that the gallery did this to him, and that his friend ran in. The agents turn into the bedroom. Instead of a wall and a window, a large hallway leading into a space that doesn't exist outside the building is present. SCP-4149. The last thing the agents see before calling for backup: another Are We Cool Yet member shaking hands with what appears to be a gigantic sloth in a three-piece suit. By the time the MTF arrived with special anti-cognito-hazard gear, they were all ready to enter SCP-4149. The four-man team enters, rounding a corner into what appears to be a makeshift art gallery filled with anthropomorphic animals, lizards in loungewear, birds in fancy dresses, and the large sloth in a suit the agents had seen. Along the walls are paintings and artworks blurred by the agent's special eyewear. It doesn't take long before the team are noticed by the animals, SCP-4149 instances, who start criticizing their acting, in English, to the MTF's surprise. The heavily armed men start hearing complaints and incompetent social commentary about their lack of subtlety from a growing crowd of clothed giant animals. Confused, they are eventually rescued by the sloth, who plays off their strange arrival as a performance piece gone awry and dismisses the crowd to other art pieces. After very slowly dragging them into a corner, the besuited sloth politely introduces himself as Professor Zorkanov, the owner of this art gallery. He claims to be a man of culture, an enjoyer of fine art, who found he could only truly operate his gallery how he wanted, free of the bounds of any one world. In fact, the entirety of SCP-4149 exists in its own pocket dimension. Upon being asked, he explained that the Are We Cool Yet member was trying to sell him some work, but it wasn't refined enough for the professor's tastes. But the artist seemed to have run off to another planet to train, specifically one lacking an atmosphere. The professor agrees to be designated as SCP-4149-2 and undergo interviewing to help the Foundation understand what the situation surrounding his gallery is, which is where the Foundation finds most of their information for the anomaly's description. SCP-4149 is what's known as an extradimensional space, a location that doesn't quite exist in any one reality, but by itself in a pocket dimension. It's accessible through a hallway in the apartment building which the Foundation has bought and slated for demolition. Inside SCP-4149, one can access a large warehouse serving as a gallery, containing upwards of 70 different art pieces, ranging from fancy oil paintings to contemporary sculptures and modern art. Almost all of them are cognito-hazardous in one way or another, extremely dangerous to the untrained human mind. The gallery itself seems to be populated by a wide variety of entities, not just the finely dressed animals that caught the MTF off guard. They claim to come from all the various neighboring universes and realities that SCP-4149 borders, and seem to be fine looking at all of the art pieces. And of course, the proprietor of the establishment, SCP-4149-2, Professor Zorkanov, 2 meters tall, dressed in a nice waistcoat and tweed jacket. Foundation agents all describe him as friendly and polite to a fault, even if he is a giant sloth. Unfortunately, that means everything he says or does is at a snail's pace, or more accurately, a sloth's pace. But he usually spends his time plodding between the various art pieces and explaining or discussing them with the guests as curator of the gallery. Where the professor gets the artworks isn't quite clear, nor is how. He says he can travel through universes and worlds to some degree, but this is unconfirmed. For now, all the Foundation knows is that sometimes the works in SCP-4149 just suddenly seem to cycle out with new attractions. The gallery isn't a perfect socializing space, though. The entry that exists in the apartment building is a design flaw, a construction error, but not one that can be easily fixed without tearing the entire place down and starting again. Something the professor has sounded very upset at when someone deciphered his glacial yelling. SCP-4149 is friendly to Foundation interests, though. The professor doesn't want uninvited guests to know about his gallery any more than the Foundation does. To that end, he's cut a deal. So long as SCP-4149 submits to background interviews and SCP-4149 is carefully kept under containment, SCP-4149-2 will be permitted to keep operating his gallery, and the Foundation will protect it against hostile intruders. What intruders, you ask? Well, you'll have to look to the interviews for that. The main interview is conducted by a D-class through an earpiece. The giant sloth's statement have to be sped up multiple times to be understandable on the recording. It starts off simple. Zorkanov is the best human approximation to the professor's real name. Him coming from another world, presumably one inhabited by other sloths. His name wasn't designed to be spoken by simple humans. But he explains, the universe that SCP-4149 exists in is a shell. A universe that has undergone heat death and become completely empty before being compacted into just enough space to build SCP-4149. The professor, having some ability to pop from universe to universe, decided to make this place his home and host to his love of art and expression. He seems reluctant to talk about his original home, though, until directly asked by the D-class. Then he explains. He was a man in well standing in his home universe, on a world inhabited by creatures similar to himself. He enjoyed all the fruits of society, culture, music, social occurrences, and yes, art. Unfortunately, the rest of his society didn't share his views on art. They considered it not only a waste of time, but an insult, an offensive level of arrogance. Being a highly technological society, they thought art and humanities were inappropriate expressions of emotion. But from the professor's point of view, all this had done was create a deeply unhappy, deeply uneducated society. His private art collection in his manor was a closely guarded secret, but eventually the secret got out. His name was spat out as a cultural extremist, a subversive nonconformist who was giving dangerous ideas to the next generation. A mob formed and did what mobs do best. They chased him from his home at night and burned his collection. Barely escaping with his life and the few pieces of art he could grab, the professor swore to rebuild his collection for the joy of all. As the interview continues, the D-Class reveals he is blind. That's how he avoided being driven insane by any of the many cognito-hazardous art pieces. The professor hasn't heard of blindness before, but sympathizes. Eventually, things settle into a familiar rhythm. Professor Zorkanov continues to operate his gallery for the pleasure of all of his visitors, and the Foundation need only station one armed guard in the apartment, instead of spending time, money, and effort forcing everyone into inconvenient containment in the middle of a crowded city. But just a few short months later, the Foundation receives a call from the agent on duty requesting backup. Once again, the MTF arrived on scene, kitted out for cognito hazards. They enter into SCP-4149 heavily armed and armored. This time, they find something much more surprising and dangerous than an art exhibition. The guests are lurking around the edges of the walls, but the professor is in the middle of the floor, arguing extremely slowly with two more giant sloths. They're dressed in tactical combat gear and holding what look to be guns. Their yelling sped up is made clear. The newcomers are berating the professor for expressing his art and for running from something called the Xenarthra Council. When they finally notice the presence of the MTF, they scoff and gradually raise their weapons, telling the MTF to leave while they still have the chance. But while one of them is busy yelling at the sloths to drop their weapons, another one of the troops simply walks over and pulls the guns out of the clawed paws of the sloths. Come on, they're sloths, man. By the time they slowly realize their weapons are no longer in their hands, the sloths panic at the thought of these strange, furless creatures moving so many times faster than they ever thought possible. Just before they're handcuffed, the pair disappear in a burst of green light, and at this, all the guests burst into applause. This conflict, this emotion, this humor, this is the performance they were waiting for the whole time. Now check out Killer Living Graffiti SCP-1155 Predatory Street Art or SCP-683 Refrigerator Art for more art-related anomalies that will blow your mind.